Jordan Peterson, though, a guy who was a college professor, you can find his like Rate My Professor stuff, where the pro reviews, reviews that really like him, talk about how they changed the students' lives. The critical ones, like he's a good presenter, but a lot of the stuff he says is dubious and factually inaccurate. Your
I
mileage
mean,
may
even to
vary.
himself, I mean, he catches himself in that opening clip where when he says, like, what matters is matter. That's a weird definition, you know?
Exactly. And I'd recommend Some More News did a 3 hour video on Jordan Peterson on all that stuff. But nonetheless, Jordan Peterson, a guy, a very much birthed by our university system, similar in Canada. I mean, he wasn't in the United States, but nonetheless, was allowed to like practice his sort of Jungian insights, uh, uh, theories about lobsters and what rats are like in Frozen. He was able to do that for tuition money.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I think we should have an expansive enough higher education system where people like him, people like Brett Weinstein, a lot of these like bad faith little creeps are able to, you know what, Brett Weinstein can go into like how maybe genes are where we got World War II from into his seminar. You can do that stuff as the only thing is you have to allow critical race theory, Marxism, and feminism. And for some people, that's too big of a sort of bridge to cross. And so we're instead just attacking all higher ed. I want to talk today about the student loan thing. So where we stand now is Joe Biden's going to announce what he's finally his action on student loans. He'd always said in the campaign that he'll do 10,000. He said for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that? And he will look into. He'll get his cleverest legal minds and economics wonks to like pour through the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence to find out what his authority is to maybe do up to 50,000, which is what Elizabeth Warren and Chuck Schumer asked him to do. Doesn't sound like we're going to get that. It's going to sound like that installment of National Treasure student loan edition. They came up empty there. So it looks like it's
Cancelled.
going to be, yeah, $10,000 if you make under $125,000 a year. So it's going to be means tested as well. I will just note, and I'm forgetting who, White of the Post, I believe, on Twitter, tweeted out this thing, which is like, why is it that middle class, when we're talking about taxes and tax increases, stretches up to $400,000,
Mm-hmm.
but it's only $125,000 when we're talking about who gets student loan forgiveness? Okay, so it's going to be this, what is fundamentally kicking the can down the road. The student loan problem is way bigger than that. It's going to continue to get bigger than that until we do something like Bernie College's free public tuition for all and debt jubilee, massive, widespread, not means tested one. Uh, we have a guy though that we should introduce people to, and lucky for you if you've never heard of this man before, but I bet you will for the rest. You probably haven't been paying that close of attention to the Biden administration. Larry Summers. Who is Larry Summers? Larry Summers is this fellow here. He is a Charles W. Eliot University professor and president emeritus at President Emeritus at Harvard. Secretary of the Treasury for President Clinton and director of the National Economic Council for President Obama. So here we don't like that kind of guy.
I mean, just to be like clear for folks, like this, like the fact that this guy is not coming from the right wing, but was a creature who was sort of unleashed by both Obama and Bill Clinton tells you everything that you need to know about the history of neoliberalism in this country.
Exactly right. And look, if you don't like Hillary Clinton, whether it's from the left or from the right, you should not be agreeing with what this vampire says. So let's continue here. Larry Summers, what does he say? I hope the administration does not contribute to inflation macroeconomically. Is that sorry, I don't have an economics background. I feel like I'm being bullshitted already. Macroeconomically,
Mm-hmm.
I hope the administration does not contribute to inflation macroeconomically by offering unreasonably generous student loan relief, or microeconomically by encouraging college tuition increases. Every dollar spent on student loan relief is a dollar that could have gone to support those who didn't get the opportunity to go to college. Uh, he follows this up the following day. There is no analogy to bank bailouts. Student loans are grants that cost the government money. The bank bailouts were loans at premium interest in which the government turned a profit. Now, you can get in on this, David. Oh, well, shoot. That's Larry Summers with Jeffrey Epstein. I don't know how I got in on that. Sorry, let me get to the next one. Oh, shoot. Let me get to the next one.
Oh no, you can't delete it.
Damn it. I don't know how those got in there. That's really embarrassing for me. Okay,
Yeah,
damn.
two people very concerned
Okay.
with opportunities for America's youth, right there.
So that was also Steven Pinker's in the background there, another Harvard guy. Warren Gunnels, Bernie Sanders, economic policy guy. Baloney, Wall Street banks got bags of cash 2008 by receiving trillions in 0.5% interest rate loans from the Fed, purchasing T-bonds with a much higher rate of return and charging 25% interest on credit cards and other loans. Wall Street didn't pay back shit. The American people did. That's a really I really like that point in terms of like, we always hear about how Wall Street paid back. Oh, we paid back all of this money, right? Well, it's like, where were these profits coming from? Right. Well, you were getting all this low interest treatment. Where do banks get their profits from? I mean, David, you're the econ guy.
I mean, they're getting it. They're zombie companies. I mean, they're sitting there and they're just draining money out of the pockets of productive laborers. And the way that they're able to do that is because they have access to capital up front, which the rest of us need. Like, what you saw after the financial crisis was this huge expansion in the credit markets to normal everyday people. So that's something that because unlike like things like the PPP loans, you have to pay those back. These companies basically, because they have early access to capital that we don't have at rates that we don't get, they utilize that to then bilk money off of all of us for years and years to come after.
Yeah, and there's a weird little misstatement that he makes. I don't know why he calls these grants.
Yeah.
He says student loans are grants that cost the government money. No, if they were grants, you don't pay back a grant.
Yeah.
They should be grants, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. And we're going to get to why they aren't grants in a second. But that's a very strange thing. Emeritus, that means retired. I mean, maybe he's losing a little bit of step. Should probably stop listening to people like this, would be my come away. Also, Larry Summers says scarce public resources should be put to their highest and best use, regardless of how they are derived. Debt relief rather than a Head Start, adequate funding of fundamental science, COVID care. This is a guy who worked for an administration. Let's bash Obama for a little bit. The fucking housing crisis, where we decided to just, like Gunnels mentioned, give banks just trillions of dollars. You know who we could have just given that money to? We could have said, oh, guess what? Everybody who's worried about what they're going to do for their living situation because they're underwater, you own that house now. Imagine what, I mean, we didn't have we had Obama, who was an entire cabinet full of Citibank people. Like, that was not going to happen. That could have happened. Yeah, go ahead, David.
No, totally. I mean, and it's extremely rich for him to go on, this boy to go on about this kind of stuff, because when it came time to doing COVID spending in this country, he was railing against that because of the inflationary pressures on it, right? So, like, this guy, he's nitpicking his arguments to try to make it seem like he's looking out for the little guy. Again, crickets when it comes to the fact that the Federal Reserve was propping up corporate profits by stabilizing the debt market and picking up millions upon millions of dollars of corporate debt, right? Just taking care of that system. No real problem there. But when it comes to alleviating the suffering and the difficulty that an entire generation of Americans is really struggling with, that's bad policy, right? And again, I totally agree that it's ridiculous to talk about a country like the United States as if we have scarce resources to help people out. I think I totally agree that there's a section of Americans that benefits from college debt cancellation, right? Well, what's the solution to that? a very robust social spending measure to lift up all people. And that's something that Larry Summers would be very much against too. So there is no plan here that he is would be pro. He's just trying to find ways to try to divide folks, which is also something that the Biden administration is playing into when they're trying to do means testing stuff like that, right? When you don't make these things universal public goods, like university education should be free across the country, then you create a system where you have resentment and people who are really wanting to see those kind of programs end. And Summers, as somebody who spent time in the Clinton administration, knows just how to ride that resentment. This is like one of the big political tricks that people like Summers and his ilk do, where they recognize that there is a lot of to use the term that is super annoying to me, economic anxiety in this country, right? They recognize that exists, but instead of what they try to do is run interference so that people don't sort of present that frustration at the ruling class, at the people who actually profit from the misery, but rather have people who are on the kind of bottom to middle rungs of this society. Let's see if those two groups can battle it out and leave us scot-free, right? That's the game here. He's going to talk about inflation and macroeconomic policy. And I'm telling y'all, it's all bunk. What he's really trying to do is he's trying to divide different sections of income, people of different incomes on the lower spectrum. I mean, I think a lot of people also don't recognize just how rich the rich are sometimes. Even relative to look, to me, I'll be completely honest, $125,000 a year seems absolutely astronomical to me. I don't really spend time with people who make that kind of money. It doesn't seem like something that I'll be getting anytime in the near future in my life. So I get where that kind of frustration or even the feeling of oh, well, it doesn't matter, those people on the kind of bubble. But when you compare $125,000 a year to what the people at the very top in the society, not even 1%, but the top 5%, it's astronomical. So again, what if we could get people, who are making $125,000 and people who make $60,000 a year to get really pissed off at one another and think that, oh, they're getting something up on me, or people who come from the working class who went to college, and versus people who are from the working class who didn't go to college. If you could find ways to sort of press on those kind of fissures, that's how you sort of derail and destroy this kind of movements. And just last thing, right quick, this kind of attack was coming no matter what level of debt forgiveness Biden did. And that's why it's so cowardly and stupid and counterproductive to do what they're doing here. Because the critics, the people who are going to be mad about this, are going to be mad no matter what, because they want to see people in debt peonage for their entire life. That's good for them. The reason Larry Summers wants y'all to be upping your student loan payments right now is because he knows that will mean that you will have less money in your pocket at the end of the month, which means when you go to work, you're going to be a little bit more worried about losing your job. You're going to be a little bit less likely to take a risk, like pushing for a raise or fighting to join a union, because your expenses have gone up significantly, and they don't like this idea. People in America, working class people in America, middle class people in America, aren't doing very well right now. And what they want to do is they want to make it worse for y'all, because even in this situation where it's not even good, right, people are starting to push back and have some opportunities to fight back against the incredible power that capitalists have over the rest of us. And Summers wants to return that whip.
Exactly. The whip this is the whip that sort of corporate America and industrial and financial America inherited from the slaveocracy, basically. And so a couple things. What could we? I'm glad Larry Summers is so interested in making sure every public dollar goes to the most essential need. Well, we could do a few things. I would, first of all, Medicare for all should be happening day one. Obviously, easy. Larry Summers is not for that. But we absolutely, COVID care. Larry Summers, thank you for giving a fuck about our healthcare system. Medicare for all would be that, and extend that to everybody. No one's going to give a fuck that some student loan debt was canceled. But guess what? Let's say you still think students. So students, first of all, many of whom did not graduate, just have debt that they are saddled with without the degree. Nonetheless, let's add truckers. Truckers go into a lot of debt. There's a lot of different sort of professional debt that people have to go into. Drivers. Let's throw all this sort of stuff into the Jubilee, and let's really start thinking. and also there does need to be a reform too, right? Like we can't just, this is why this is ultimately a kick the can down the road situation, because nothing is being done to actually stop the like the problem of people needing to pay for college. But I will just say, when we're talking about how much of people like Larry Summers are kicking and screaming against the Bernie Sanders style program that would be public higher education, let's remember how little the fucking price tag was for this. This is from this old Bernie article um, from CNBC. Senator Bernie Sanders introduced a bill to make college free and have Wall Street pay for it. The Tax on Wall Street Speculation Act would levy a 0.5% tax on stock trades, a 0.1% fee on bond trades, and a 0.005% fee on derivative transactions. That would raise up to $2.4 trillion over the next decade, according to the summary of the bill. I mean, that's not exactly fucking Stalin. Right. Like we are, ladies and gentlemen, we are still tinkering at the fucking edges here. And we could have it where all those people who didn't go to college for whatever reason, and look, people shouldn't have to be forced to go to college past 18. Look, you're adults. You should have that option, and it should not be price prohibited at all. And this, anybody who's arguing against this, both this cancellation and Medicare for all, wants that elitist system where only rich kids are able to go to college.
And let's also just like make like the larger like kind of populist argument here. When Bernie Sanders is talking about increasing taxes on Wall Street to pay for these kind of social programs, I think it's really important for people to realize that there are multiple roles that Wall Street plays. Yes, I think most people understand it's rich people, great. But what does Wall Street represent? What does that trading represent? That's where all of the profits that go from your labor, right, or the natural resources in this country and around the globe go in the form of profits, right? So like these mines, like for example, our friends who are fighting against Warrior Met, those companies are traded on Wall Street, right? And they take the profits from that coal mine, and then it sort of gets washed through this larger financial system that we sort of refer to colloquially as Wall Street, right? So this is actually taking back money that we all created, value that we all created, and using that to improve the lives of everyday people. And I totally agree with Matt that, you know, a small percentage tax increase on that is tinkering around the edges. We should be doing a hell of a lot more to that system to return a lot of the lost value that has been hoovered out of lots of parts of this country and returning it to the people.
Yeah, and we're going to historicize the student loan situation in a little bit, but I do want to get into the PPP hypocrite section.
Yeah.
So Steven Crowder, of course, had to dip his oar in student loan forgiveness. Sounds really nice until to illegal immigrants, people with no life experience, people who don't have families yet, and people who use preferred pronouns. I mean, that's especially the last point. Like, they're so fucking salty over having to like say pronoun. But Jeff from Regina points out that Louder with Crowder LLC took out a $70,000 PPP loan and got that all forgiven by Your Majesty, the United States government. So you're welcome, Stephen, for that taxpayer money for a loan that you could have just paid back.
Where are the complaints there? Oh, again, that's going into the pockets of wealthy people who have LLCs. You know, so that's not a problem. But yeah, as Matt was saying, like making sure that people who didn't graduate college and have, you know, significant student loan debt, who, you know, don't get to reap in the full benefits of having that degree. Oh no, that's terrible. That's inflationary. But it's wonderful that, you know, Steven Crowder's YouTube show was funded by the U.S. government for a period of time. I mean, like the PPP loan is like one of the best gotcha because all of these people took it.
Yeah, I'm just realizing Charles Ghost says Jeff from what I might not be pronouncing Regina.
Yeah, I know you did say that. Very funny. I was just gonna let that go. Let's zoom into South Texas just really quick for the PPP thing, because again, like this is the fundamental point of the right. And I'm sorry, I don't give a shit. I mean, one, we all know what the Democratic Party is. Like Larry Summers is like very much a creature of the right. It's always amazing how much you know, people on the right and the wealthy hate any kind of social program that helps out everyday people, but love programs that help them out. So this is a race we've covered a bit on the show. We'll be doing more as we get closer. to the election in South Texas. Congressional candidate Monica de la Cruz disparaged COVID-19 aid despite taking thousands of dollars for her businesses. Monica de la Cruz runs on a campaign against quote unquote runaway spending and quote socialist policies, blasting Democratic measures to expand federal assistance amid the pandemic. So she's been running this campaign basically against any kind of social spending, and particularly noting the measly, paltry amounts of money that everyday working people got with the COVID stimulus checks.
Right.
But it looks like she doesn't like government largesse when it comes to helping out everyday working people, but she loves it when it can benefit her. De La Cruz reported herself in disclosure forms as president of JSM De La Cruz Holdings, which generated for her rental income in the $100,000 to $1 million bracket in 2020. The firm received a $1,000 economic injury disaster grant in May 2020, as well as a $39,000 loan. De La Cruz also co-owned Navi Business Group with her then husband, reporting $36,000 in spousal income in 2020. The firm received $4,000 in an economic injury disaster grant in April 2020 and a $98,000 economic injury disaster loan in May of that year.
We should have done this. We should have taken out a fucking PPP.
But she loved these. This isn't, look, I mean, this piece goes on for a while. She has multiple random ass companies where she was taking these loans out. Another De La Cruz business, DLC Insurance, was approved for a $38,000 Paycheck Protection Program loan back in April 29, 2020, intended to support 5 jobs at the firm. But the firm was ultimately shuttered during the pandemic.
Yeah.
De La Cruz, who listed her title as president of the company on disclosure forms, reported making $44,000 and $600 in income from DLC Insurance that year. The PPP loan was forgiven, including interest, right? I mean, look, I always say there's only so much space that, showing right-wingers hypocrisy on this kind of stuff does, because they're all hypocrites and liars. But I do think it's important to keep those at the top of your mind when you hear these folks going on about how we can't be given programs to help out millions of people. They're very happy to take targeted government programs that benefit exclusively the rich. And this country is damn good at this. Like when we had Mark Blythe on the show for the Michael Memorial Show on TMBS, he used a metaphor that I thought was really great, talking about the way that the government handled the COVID pandemic when it came to the millions, trillions of dollars that were basically funneled into the pockets of the wealthy and the rich in this country. And I think people have talked about it, but it's one of those things, like as the news cycle moves on, people forget how outrageously egregious it is, the transfer of wealth to those at the top of the society was during the COVID-19 pandemic, and how little we got as everyday people. And yet Larry Summers, all these characters are getting very mad because people got $1,200 check, right?
Yeah.
But Mark Blythe made a point that I thought was really good. He said, the thing is, in America, particularly when it comes to Federal Reserve policy, the taps only go one way. Like the infrastructure is only designed to put public money into the pockets of banks and wealthy investors, not to everyday people. They have not built up the capacity to do that because they have no interest in doing it, which is why the Federal Reserve moved with impressive world historic speed to shore up the profits of the super wealthy. I mean, people forget there was a huge stock sell-off at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then the pipes turned on, and trillions of dollars were flowed into financial interest and wealthy Americans that basically buoyed stock prices in this country for years. Even when when all of the other metrics of like economic, like good economic growth were starting to decline, you saw stock prices explode. And that's because rich people had incredible amounts of disposable income to pump into assets, right? So again, student loan forgiveness, something that will benefit millions upon millions of everyday people. That's terrible. That's inflationary. But Federal Reserve and government policy that's pumping trillions of dollars into the pockets of wealthy investors, no, that's good. That helps us all. It doesn't. It creates a very clear two-tiered system. But I know, as Matt's going to make the argument too, even a student loan forgiveness on its own is insufficient, because that just continue to prop up the system of privation is our higher education system.
I mean, a fundamental problem is that we expect it to be a vehicle for class mobility and class advancement. And what needs to happen in tandem with making higher education, because there's a myth of higher education that like sort of Democrats like to make, which is that people just need to be educated out of their poverty, right? Well, it's
Mm-hmm.
like nah, like that's not what the problem here. The capitalism isn't going to be able to provide for all these educated people. We need to give folks through the government the things that they are actually searching for when they want to advance in class, which is things like healthcare and affordable housing and just shit like that, right? Like that's why people choose a profession to like major in. It's like, oh, that's going to get me a job with good benefits. Everyone fucking knows this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like ultimately, like this is the and it's done a, I hope, but I worry like a massive damage to humanity's conception of education, that it is just now a vehicle for class stratification,
Oh,
and it has been that way for hundreds of years. The governor of Virginia, the colonial governor of Virginia back in the fucking 1600s, William Berkeley, did not want a university, a college in the colonies. He resisted it for decades, and what he because he wanted the people that were educated to that you had to you had to be rich enough to send your kid to fucking Oxford, right? So if you weren't that, your kid was going to stay and fucking work in the colonies,
mm-hmm.
and that. So I want to circle back to what something Crowder said, which is like, this sounds like something that's illegal immigrants would like, or whatever the fuck. Well, I do think Joe Biden should probably stop listening to Larry Summers and start listening to the folks polled by Color of Change, specifically on black voters on student loans. So poll results reveal more than half of all black voters, 56%, have held or are currently holding student loan debt, and 84% support a full or partial elimination of student loan debt, with two-thirds indicating they strongly support eliminating student loan debt. Black women, one of the most active voting blocs in the nation, show the highest support for eliminating student loan debt. 9 in 10 support partial debt elimination, and half support full elimination. Further, 40% of black voters indicate they want the Biden-Harris administration to ensure that any student admitted into a public college can graduate without taking on student loans. And another 40% say they would never vote for a candidate who opposes student loan debt elimination. And that's why you can really say we're kicking the can, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
no talk of how we're going to do this thing about kids attending school without having to take out loans, because we're not prepared to even fucking think about that, with where our party leaders are at. Obviously Republicans, but also the Democrats.
No, because
Um, yeah, go
the
ahead.
Democratic Party, the Biden Democratic Party, is much more concerned with what Larry Summers thinks, and what's going to make Larry Summers mad than they are even with their own voters. It just
Yeah,
shows you everything that is so horrifically inept about that carcass of a political party, that they are frankly immune in a lot of ways, or at least they try their best to be as immune as possible, to popular will of the people who they purportedly support. Represent.
yep. Another part of this, which I think is also interesting, what would they do with that uh, student loan forgiveness? 73% say they would save for retirement. 53%, which, by the way, another thing the fucking government should be taking care of. People shouldn't have to be worrying
Yeah.
about retirements like this. 53% would buy a home instead of renting. 49% would live in a different neighborhood. 48% would be more likely to leave a job where they're facing discrimination. This is where we're getting into the labor compulsion element of why debt. This is why we financialize everything instead of grants, as Larry Summers accidentally said, because it makes you go work for a capitalist for it. 30% would seek to start their own small businesses. I read this book, A Feminist Reading of Debt, Lucy Cavallero and Veronica Gaggio. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that, but this is a little bit long, but I really like the way they put this here. Drawing on concrete narratives of, let me start here. That is what ties us to a future of violent relations from which we want to flee. So let me start here. That is what does not allow us to say no when we want to say no. That is what ties us to a future of violent relations from which we want to flee. Debt forces us to maintain broken relationships, which we continue to be locked into because of medium or long-term financial obligations. Now, all of this stuff needs to be taken seriously, both at an interpersonal level and at basically a nation state level. Like when we're talking about like the types of bad relationships people have to stay in because, oh shit, Biden's going to make me start paying student loan debt again. Um, like or why are we like or in sovereign debt issues? But debt is what impedes economic autonomy, even in feminized economies with which women play leading roles. Debt compulsively makes one have to accept more flexible labor conditions, and in that sense is an efficient apparatus of exploitation. This is why. This is why guys like Summers and even Joe Biden, like, debt is a compulsion mechanism to get you to serve capitalists,
and
right?
and one that's like very, very passionately defended. Like, we're going to talk a little bit later about global debt and how that's utilized to undermine democracies across the world. But just think about this, right? If you wanted to see how important debt and the ability to pursue people for debt that they owe you is, look at the difference between how slow and convoluted and difficult it is to pursue any kind of serious claim against abuses to working people by their bosses. Look what happens when your boss is breaking labor law, how weak you are, even if the laws are in the books, right? How difficult it is to get the state to care or to do something. And then look at how incredibly efficient the system is in this country for taking money away from people, right? If you're somebody who, you get a weird ass bill in the mail for a medical procedure that was done years ago that you paid for, and then for some reason that company decides to pursue you, and maybe they sold that debt to like 5 or 6 other different firms. Look at how incredibly responsive the state can be, and just the general system in this country can be, into trying to force you and discipline you into paying that debt, through doing things like lowering your credit score, coming at you, through the legal system. This system works very, very well for people who own debt and want to collect on that, and it works very, very poorly for people who sell their labor to somebody else, and are trying to make sure that the laws that are already written are followed.
Yeah. So why did where did the student debt situation come from? Well, it goes back to a little thing called Sputnik, where we'll just put a little bit of snooze reel.
This man stands on the threshold of outer space. It's the biggest story of the year, possibly the #1 story of the century. This launching of the Russian satellite, which brings into the realm of possibility all those wild science fiction stories of interplanetary travel. Watch it. It's fascinating. This animation is a graphic portrayal of how a satellite operates. This story of the Russian satellite burst upon a startled world early in October. Russia announcing she had shot a man-made moon 560 miles into space, where it was circling the Earth at the dizzy speed of 18,000 miles per hour. It sent its familiar beep beep back to Earth, was tracked by radio and by sight as it hurtled across the heavens. The satellite was launched as part of IGY, the International Geophysical Year, a gigantic study of the Earth and its surroundings by 64 nations from both sides of the Iron Curtain, in common effort to benefit mankind.
I think that last part's very interesting to note, that it wasn't just like the commies with their devious technology that was cross Iron Curtain, as he says, partnership. But nonetheless, what was our reaction here? Oh, fuck. We need to catch up to those motherfuckers. So Eisenhower was president. Said we need to get on this. This is embarrassing to me. I'm a war president, war hero president. LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, newly into the Senate, says, okay, we're going to do this higher education stuff. I got this from a book here, The Debt Trap, How Student Loans Became a National Catastrophe. It also has this section here, which goes into where the bargain that this came from. The Eisenhower administration believed loans would burden students who went into low-paying fields, but it also, which it, of course, we all know, does massively. That's why corporations and the big like banks like it, because this makes you have to like go work for a oil company or something like that because you need to pay off your loans. But it also didn't like the idea of a wide-scale scholarship program, which would undermine the president's limited government philosophy. In January, Eisenhower proposed a mere 10,000 college scholarships a year over 4 years for students studying the sciences. The man who would decide this debate was Carl Elliott, the Alabama Democrat who had unsuccessfully pressed Truman for a college scholarship program. Elliott headed the House Subcommittee on Special Education, which crafted higher education policy. The son of tenant farmers, he had worked as a houseboy and groundskeeper to pay for a degree at the University of Alabama. Roll Tide. His papers are at Alabama currently. He ran for Congress in 1948, telling coal miners there was no reason their children shouldn't have the same opportunity to go to college as wealthy elites in the city. And let me read that again, because that is all that this is about. Ran for Congress in 1948, telling coal miners that there was no reason their children shouldn't have the same opportunity to go to college as wealthy elites in the city. That's fundamentally what this is about. Elliott had fought for years for a universal scholarship program to no avail. He saw only one way to bring together liberals and conservatives: student loans. In the summer of 1957, he held hearings at which a University of Minnesota official tested that his school had extended loans to students for decades. Few borrowers defaulted. Elliott pointed out that college graduates on average earn $10,000 more than 30 years than non-graduate. And again, he goes into how this accounting is, so a modest loan would be a high reward for investment. He proposed a massive new student loan program. In a deft political strategy, Democrats gave their bill the patriotic name, the National Defense Education Act, and attached a requirement that each borrower sign an oath of loyalty to the U.S. government, appeasing McCarthyites. Conservatives approved. That's how we got our student loan situation, from that sort of devil spawn by a well-meaning guy who nonetheless, it did send more people to college. But there's a problem with certain incentives. So one thing is, so let's say there's two sort of theories, which is that the university system is all communist now, and that one we have, which is that it's like sort of neoliberalized. And I would just say this: let's say you have $50,000 to give in scholarships. Do you give that to one needy student for a full ride, or do you give that to 10 let's say high grade, well testing, a lot of things on their extracurriculars, all these code for wealthy and white, but mainly this is code for class, right? No, you split out the $10,000 to 5 different kids who are going to then pay that extra $40,000, and that's the system that we've ended up with. So we have this system now. That's that. And later it realized that this sort of theory about what's happening in Minnesota doesn't really apply when you need this to be a program for the miners' kid, because they aren't the financing, the profit isn't there. And so we need this to just go, we need to go back and just make this grants. I mean, ultimately that's what we need to do. Public higher education, like Bernie Sanders said, with just that fucking tax on speculation. And then and yeah, we can tax the endowments. We can do all this fun stuff too. Go ahead, David.
No, I mean, I just also think that because of the way, because of what most people think of a college education as being, like, it used to be a class status symbol, right? Which was what ruling class people used to sort of justify the fact that they hired their son and their cousin's kids to work at their firm instead of somebody else who might be more qualified or deserving.
Right. He knows Latin now.
Because it was something that was expensive, because it was something that was only really accessible for most of our history to people of the upper classes. A lot of people sort of associate a college degree with, the opening of job opportunities. And certainly, it helps out a lot of folks. But as more and more of the young Americans have been going to school, which has happened dramatically in the past few decades, that more and more young people have been going to schools, to universities. There's this kind of question about like practicality, and I'm just going to nip that in the bud right now, because the point that politician from Alabama was making is that there's no reason that the son of a coal miner shouldn't have the same opportunity to be able to go and study and learn about the history of the world, or learn about art, or learn about the English language, right? Yep. This is like I think a very, very clear socialist demand that, like, what we want is like material policies, but we also want our roses too, right? We want to live in a beautiful world where people have the ability to fully pursue their talents and their interests, something that is completely shut off to most working people today, and has certainly been shut off of most working class people throughout history. And this is a demand that we shouldn't be so quick to run away from, saying like, yeah, we hold up education as a value and as a symbol of a thriving, good society that we want to be living in, apart from like the job training aspect to it.
Yep.
We want to have a system that provides meaningful, well-paid employment to people, and certainly in this kind of hellscape, it opens up doors to go to the university system. But I don't think it's worth. I think it's bad to sort of pervert that kind of larger goal of saying we want to provide this to people as just a genuine, basic right and option for people to be able to go and learn about the world and to study and to improve themselves as a measure and as a symbol of our capacity and what we are capable of doing in our society. And just to be clear, this was something that was very important, for example, in the Soviet Union, right? Was that the idea of people being able to go and be educated was seen as a social good in and of itself, in the sense that, like, look, before we had this draconian, horrific system of czarism and serfdom in this country, and now children can go, and this next generation can go, and they can learn the history of the world, something that was a privilege that was once held only by the very, very wealthy. And we should see this democratization of education as a good thing, and should be upholding that value on both the kind of practical material level of saying like, look, this indebts like a whole group of people, this is important for a lot of jobs, and also that larger, lofty, inspiring goal of saying this is something that should be a right and should be not be something that is just a privilege of the rich and powerful.
Absolutely. Like, you need to look at college education is 4 years post high school, where you are in a social learning environment, state sponsored, where you are not forced to serve a capitalist. Like, that's what, because I mean, I had to work through I worked through most semesters in college, not through NYU. I was just riding off loans. By the time got all those NYU loans, I'm just like, okay, I'm not also going to do it. You should not have to work through college, right? Like, this is another sorting mechanism. The kid, like, it's easy for a rich kid to go through college because they're like, this is a fucking breeze. If you don't have to work, it's actually not that tough.
Insane.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's like 4 or 5 days a week. I was working a job, doing 40 hours on top of my schoolwork. It's actually like crazy for me to think about that. And was constantly like, not only was that bad quality of life, I was oftentimes having to make decisions that affected my grades. Like, okay, I have like these 3 assignments that have to be done in the next 10 hours. I have to go to work. Which ones can I get done? Which ones am I just going to drop or ignore? Right. Having to cheat myself out of an education that I'm already on the, going to be forced to pay for in some form or another. Because I also couldn't, like, just on that alone, could not, support myself and find a way to survive. Well, I went to a school with a lot of rich kids, like so many other people. It was, completely different categories of what that experience was like. And I totally agree, Matt.
And also, like, look, you have opportunities straight out of high school. You don't want to, go to college. Fine. Go get that opportunity. First of all, check yourself stepping in the way of everyone fucking else getting this. But also, at any point in the future, you want to come back and get those 4 years in, you can come get them. Like, I also think we need to expand who goes to higher education facilities. Like, I think it should be open to, like, people can take little sabbaticals, like lifelong learners or whatever they're calling it now, where you could take like 3 months and go fucking be on campus at like as like a 40-year-old. You're in between jobs. Like, here you go. Like, there should be a certain allotment for that sort of stuff. And yes, we should be taking money from speculators on Wall Street to pay for it. And there should not be anybody who has a problem with that, who isn't, one of those people.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens tomorrow. But I think, as Matt put it, this is just kicking the can down the road, because the demand is student loan forgiveness, absolute, and making the university system free for people. There is really no other way around this. You can't maintain
Yep.
the system until it just falls into complete crisis.
You have to choose,
every 15,
right?
20
Like
years.
exactly. Like you have to choose between the model of the fucking it's only rich people are going to go, or this is an egalitarian public good.